Lisa Finnegan, HR Director with LinkedIn, thank you so much for sitting and talking to us today. So we're talking about fertility and specifically fertility issues and the taboo surrounding them in the workplace. So LinkedIn has conducted research, but before we get into that, I suppose, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your own personal story with this?
Sure, I'm happy to. Thank you for coming here today and talking to me. I really do think it's an incredibly important topic that we do surface and we do actually start the conversation on. My own story, got married 10 years ago. About a year later, myself and my husband decided now we were ready for a child. And I suppose with all the confidence of youth, we set out on trying for a child. And about a year later, we realised that nothing was happening for us, and we sought professional help. We went to a fertility specialist, and he recommended that we try IVF, which honestly was a huge shock to us both. We didn't know anybody who had gone through this. It wasn't something we or any of our friends or family were talking about. And we had kind of expected we would just need to do some blood tests and it would all be fine. So we started the IVF process, and the injections every night, the sleepless nights, the kind of crazy mood swings, and it was a bit of a rough ride, I have to say, but we were determined to see it through. And we had our egg transfer and I came back with a positive pregnancy test. So we thought that was hard, but we got there, we've triumphed, it was amazing. And then I told all of my friends, my family, and unfortunately I miscarried before my third trimester. So it was pretty gut-wrenching, to be honest with you. It was definitely not something that I expected to ever have to go through. And it was only really afterwards that I learned just how common it was. So 1 in 6 women or couples will experience fertility challenges in their lifetime. And certainly anecdotally, just from talking now about it to friends and family, how many people have actually experienced miscarriages but never actually discussed it. And certainly for me at the time, I did not feel that I could talk to my employer about it. I came back to work a day after the miscarriage. I tried to put a big smile on my face and just carried on. And we saved back up and we did a second round of IVF with very similar outcome, another miscarriage. And then we took a little break from it and I actually conceived naturally and kind of thought, right, this is it, this is the one. And again, very similar story, miscarried again. And it was at that third miscarriage point that I really recognised my mental health was really suffering and I could not focus on work. The smile was faltering, if you will. And so I eventually summoned up the courage to tell my manager. And it was not an easy conversation. He really struggled with it. He really didn't know what to say to me. And I kind of came away from it just feeling like I just needed some time out. So it was a very difficult journey.
I mean, you said there, after having 3 miscarriages, you decided that it was time, you couldn't necessarily go into work every day anymore. And so you decided to tell your manager about that. Like when you went back originally in the first kind of round of IVF, was it something about letting people know in your workplace that you were trying to get pregnant, or was it about the fact that you weren't conceiving naturally? So was there almost a little bit of stigma about the IVF aspect of it originally?
Totally. I mean, I've reflected on it a lot since then, and I think one big area for me was I was genuinely afraid that if I told my manager I was going through IVF or that I'd had a miscarriage, that suddenly they'd start to write me out. Right? And they'd start to think about cover for maternity leave or not getting a particular assignment or a project to work on, and they would just consider me, right, she's going to be going in a few months. And at the point in time, I was really ambitious and I wanted to do well in work and I had a job that I really liked. But the other part of it, which is probably the deeper part, was the fact that I felt like a bit of a failure, to be really honest. And I think it's taken me a long time to recognise that was how I felt. I had always worked hard. I had always been able to get what I wanted if I worked hard enough. And this is the first thing that I had put my mind to do. I ate what they told me to eat. I drank what they told me to drink. I took the hormones they told me to take, and I still couldn't get what I wanted. And what I wanted was a baby more than anything else in the world then. Yeah. And it genuinely felt like such a failure on my part, yeah.
What about your colleagues? Was it different between opening up to your colleagues than with upper management at that time, or was that something that even kind of came into your mind frame?
Yeah, I confided it in one, maybe two people at the time, and it was purely because you almost have this feeling that you're about to burst with sadness or with emotion. And there were definitely times when I was sitting at my desk with tears running down my face. And of course, my colleagues would have noticed and would have checked in and asked if I was okay. But again, it was that failure piece, and everybody around me seemed to be having children. Yeah. Everybody around me seemed to be conceiving absolutely no problem. And again, it's only later on in life that I've realised it's not that easy for everybody, and we all make assumptions about other people's journeys. It's really important that we don't make those assumptions.
Yeah. It's funny because, you know, when we introduced you, you work in HR.
Yeah.
And I feel like in HR, the people who work in HR are almost viewed slightly as if they're indestructible. Do you know? As if like, well, they know all the rules, they know how to handle everything, they know all the regulations. But this was something that you were dealing with in your personal life, and you didn't feel like you, working in HR, could even talk about it. So I suppose that's kind of moving on to, you know, that post that you put up on LinkedIn and talking about your struggles yourself. What was it that kind of brought you to that place that you wanted to almost come out and talk about it so publicly?
So you're completely right. The number one thing that HR professionals always say is you should talk to your manager when you're going through a difficult period, or come and talk to HR. And the irony of me being a HR professional and yet having this huge secret, if you will, that I was not talking to anybody about. And it was in kind of retrospect that I recognised the best thing for me would have been just to have these open conversations, to feel like I wasn't trying to hide. I remember having to go on a work trip and bring my medication with me, and the anxiety of going through the airport and having to explain what the meds were for, and worried about my timings. And I could have so easily just not taken that trip. And I think that's just a maturity thing. That's, in hindsight, is 2020. But for sure, now as a HR professional and as somebody who's been through it, I really recognise the power in sharing. When we share things like this, there is massive healing in actually talking about it. And so I, a couple of years ago, decided to try for a third round of IVF. It wasn't successful, but I told my manager here on LinkedIn that I was going through it. The difference it made to me. So I could tell her I was going to pop out for a quick scan. I needed to get my bloods done, so I couldn't attend a team meeting. Completely shut down on all my travel. Really was able to focus on the IVF process that time round. And so when it didn't work out, she knew what I was going through. She was able to kind of be with me on that journey, and was incredibly supportive out the back of it. So it just felt like, why didn't I do this years ago? And so we in LinkedIn launched a benefit at the start of this year to help people pay for their IVF processes, which is an incredible benefit. But we don't want it to just be about the financial assistance. We really wanted to make it about the emotional piece as well. Yeah. And so part of that was me writing the blog and sharing my own story and trying to normalise the conversation.
I suppose when you're talking about something that's so personal, you know, from your point of view as a woman, but this isn't just a women's issue as well. Like, I mean,
totally.
In terms of your husband, you know, this was something that he was going through with you as well. So I think that's an important point to clarify as well. It's not just, you know, the mother who's trying to get pregnant. This is something that impacts so many different versions of lots of different families in Ireland and beyond as well.
Completely, be that straight couples, gay couples, single women going through this on their own. I don't think you can talk about it as a married heterosexual challenge anymore, and it's certainly not a women's issue. My husband, you know, often describes watching me go through the IVF medication, saying he wished he could have taken it for me because he knows how much I hate needles. But he's sitting there feeling helpless watching me go through this. And then he has the same loss that I do. He's also lost the potential of this child that we've literally both written an entire life for. As soon as you get that pregnancy, you know, test back, it's like, okay, you've mapped their lives through. And yet, as a man, I think there is an expectation that you're tougher, that you're stronger, that you don't need to talk about it, that you need to be there for the woman. And actually it is just about as much experiencing the grief on both sides and being there for each other. And certainly when we talk about it here at LinkedIn, it is very much, it affects both parties. And even from a fertility challenge piece, we know it's 40% female, 40% male factor, and 20% unknown. So it's not even that the challenge itself or that the factor resides with one gender or the other, it's across both.
Yeah, it impacts so many people. Some of the research that you conducted here at LinkedIn, it was so interesting. A few of the points, nearly 2/3, so that's 65% of Irish professionals would not discuss fertility issues with their managers. So, I mean, I think this, obviously, fertility issues when it comes to IVF and you know, the heartbreak that you suffer if it doesn't work out, it kind of almost spills into just in general trying for a baby as well. And I think this comes down and coming back to almost the hoped for child that you want to have and the impact that might have on your professional career as a woman. And I mean, that was one of the statistics that kind of really stuck with me, because I'm at that age now where like a lot of people are asking me about children, and it's always the same answer, and it doesn't necessarily reflect what's actually going on in my life. But at the same time, you kind of do drill this off because you almost don't want to be put into the category of someone.
Completely.
But that's a part of the stigma as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah, of course it is.
And that's about changing that.
Changing that mentality as a society.
Yeah.
And I think Ireland has come a long way in, you know, a very short period of time, but we still always ask that, oh, you just got married, when's the baby coming along? And you literally don't know what somebody might have been through, or that they might be childless by choice. But there is a presumption that, okay, now you're at a certain age and you're going to go and have children. I think people are well intended, but actually my ask would be for people to be a lot more thoughtful about that, because that can be the most hurtful question in the world. And you referenced, you know, employees not wanting to talk to employers for fear of that stigma, for fear of being written off, for fear of if something doesn't work out, does this become a much longer conversation? It's also managers don't know how to talk to employees. And so one of the things that we've heard from our manager population since we started surfacing this topic is, can you help us? Help us have this conversation. What are the things we should be saying? What are the things we shouldn't be saying? And we're in the process of writing a manager guidebook now to help ensure that all managers know what type of leave is available, know what benefits are on offer, know that there's counselling services on hand. It's not rocket science. You don't need to solve the problem, but what we're trying to reinforce is just that empatheticness across all of our manager population.
I think one of the really heartbreaking stats as well that came out from the research was the one surrounding miscarriage. And I feel like miscarriage, you know, it is one of those subjects that is obviously hugely private and hugely personal to the person who's dealing with it. But the stat is, you know, only half of women who suffered a miscarriage told their employers. And obviously everybody has the right to do with their information as they want to. But, you know, from your own personal experience, did you feel like people would look at you in a different way, or did you feel afraid of what people would think about you personally? Like, I'm just trying to get into the mindset of what that must feel like to actually just say it out loud to your colleagues and to your managers.
Oh my God.
Was it scary?
Completely, so scary, because you're still dealing with it yourself.
Yeah.
So you can barely process it internally, let alone find the words to talk about it. And I remember telling a colleague after my second miscarriage, and we were in a meeting room and I just completely broke down.
Yeah.
And, you know, God love him, I don't think he knew what to do, but he kind of pivoted my chair away from facing out the window, and I just sat there with my shoulders shaking for about a half an hour. Because when you actually give voice to what's going on, that's almost when it dawns on you the most. Whereas if you don't tell people about it, you can kind of suppress it to a certain degree, but actually when you do suppress it, it comes back in much more vicious ways later on.
So in terms of kind of, you know, moving forward, and you said you're writing up guidelines and stuff, which sounds incredible. Is it about kind of changing the legacy issues that surround this subject moving forward in the future? So do you think more women and men and people who are going through these kind of fertility issues would be more likely in discussing things with their management rather, if they knew that there was pathways to, say, some kind of therapy or care, or even just a little bit more understanding when it comes to dealing with something like this, and then actually having to come in and work 9 to 5 and doing this every single day, because like you said, the smile started to falter.
Yeah, exactly. And we talk a lot about being able to bring your authentic self to work.
Yeah.
And so that authentic self might be you're in an amazing forum, you've just had the best weekend, or that might be I'm going through something that's really, really difficult for me and is quite tragic at the moment. But you're still able to come in and be yourself when you need to come back to the workplace. And you absolutely nailed it a couple of minutes ago when you said people shouldn't have to talk about this if they don't want to. If they feel their support network outside of work is completely fine and they want that separation, that's fine. It's about creating an environment where people feel that they can if they need to. And I think that's the really important work that we're doing, is that if there are people here or who've read the post on LinkedIn who would like to start the conversation, it's lifting that taboo just a little bit.
Yeah.
And actually, when we're open about our own experiences, it's amazing how many people will echo that back to you and say, oh, that happened to me, or my sister, or my brother and his wife. That is happening all over this building. It's really, really interesting. And we're actually having those conversations in a much more open, easy way. It doesn't feel like it has that hold over you that it used to.
Yeah. You said there earlier, you know, at the very beginning that you were, and you are, I would imagine, still incredibly ambitious in your career. And I suppose coming out the other side of having shared your story, it must feel very like, you know, a weight has been lifted. And you can tell, I was looking at some of the responses on the LinkedIn post, that people are really responding to you being so open and so honest. What would you say to people who are, say, afraid to be as open and as honest as you were, because potentially they're in a company that isn't like LinkedIn, that doesn't have these guidelines in place, or that isn't working towards them at the moment? We can't necessarily say that that's a bad thing and call them out on it because it's not there yet.
Totally.
But what kind of message would you have for maybe people who are struggling with these issues?
I think the message is find somebody you can talk to. So maybe that is your manager, maybe that's a colleague, maybe that is HR. But I think if you are coming to work and you're really struggling every single day, there is a lot of healing in actually sharing these types of challenges. You'd be surprised how many people are going through that. And then I think the more we talk about it, the more we can change the way this is viewed, so that companies can feel that pressure of actually needing to change their policies, right? So we're certainly not suggesting that everybody needs to certainly start paying for their employees' fertility treatments. But we are saying is, think about what your flexible policy is. Think about how you're able to support your employees. Are you an empathetic manager? Are you an empathetic leader? Because ultimately, if you are and you really support your employee, that will come back to you 100 times over. So it's not that you need to go and create a million policies. It's just be a good human. I mean, that's really the basics of it.
It's funny how you say, like, be a good human, because, you know, historically, I think, you know, you hear the odd jokes, don't you, about like, oh, well, she's going to be pregnant soon and she'll be out the door and all this kind of stuff. Like, it's almost a bit of a culture that has been around in Ireland. That's the only country I can kind of speak for. But, you know, it's there, and like you said, people crack jokes about it sometimes and they don't necessarily know what people are going through. So it is about almost just having a little bit of empathy to everybody's situation as well.
Exactly.
And not being afraid to maybe talk to your company about these situations, and you never know, that might begin something that could bring in policies.
Exactly. So just not assuming that you know either what somebody is going through or what they even want. And we are starting to talk about childless by choice. Right? So don't assume that everybody wants a family either, or that everybody's situation is exactly the same. I think the worst thing you can do is just assume that you know what an individual actually wants, because you don't. I think just by creating a good atmosphere, a good working environment, that's how you'll really get to know what people are actually motivated by, what they want for their lives, and that's how you'll create an amazing culture.
The things that LinkedIn are doing at the moment when it comes to this issue, you know, I saw the hashtag fertility at work and these kind of things. Obviously, it's not only raising awareness by sharing stories, it's also bringing in action. So, you know, policies and, like you said, the guidelines and stuff like that. What do you hope to come out of this kind of beyond LinkedIn? Like, where do you see this kind of going in terms of society in Ireland?
So I think just starting the conversation is where change ultimately comes from. And so be that writing my post, which has gone out to the world effectively for people to read and to judge for themselves what they want. But I think just starting that conversation and helping people understand that this is an incredibly common issue. This affects 1 in 6 couples. This is not something that is the minority in the corner. This is something that a lot of people will experience in their lifetime in different forms. It may not be that it leads to IVF. It may be that you've had 1 child but can't get pregnant again. There are lots of different forms of infertility or fertility challenges. And so just by bringing it to the forefront of people's minds, knowing that how common it is, and thinking about this shouldn't be a taboo.
Yeah.
You know, this is something that is almost the last taboo in this country. And I think by having the conversation, we can break that down. And so people, women in particular, never need to call in sick after having a miscarriage. And that was my big hope for this, that I have very many close friends who have experienced miscarriage, myself included, and we've picked up the phone or we've sent the text that says, I have a bad flu, I won't be in tomorrow. And to have to call in sick as a way to get time off after a miscarriage just feels fundamentally wrong. And so if we can get to the point whereby the taboo is lifted, people can share what they're experiencing, and if they have a miscarriage, they're able to talk about it and get the time they need to heal properly, that's phenomenal.
Absolutely. Well, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing your story, and thank you as well for doing the work that you're doing with LinkedIn. I'm hoping that, you know, other companies will follow suit. It's really important.
Thank you.